This is 134 cannabis plants chipped up and made into a compost pile. So that's a whole entire, field of cannabis that's been chipped up, and they've got it ready in the fall to sit over winter. And this is Radical Herbs. Give thanks to them. And they're going to be able to turn that back into their soil, and that's the way that they didn't have. They were able to process the stalks and everything that they work with.
And then everything that they gave to those plants is then all left in that pile. So they put love, they put intention, they put money, they put nutrients, everything into that pile. Let's not let it go unwasted. One of the most important, viable things that we have in the industry is our own cannabis plants. And if we're just even putting our own cannabis plants back into our soils, back into our systems, back into our ferments, then we're taking the one intelligence from last season's crop and we're giving it to the next season's crop, and that can only be good, right? Yep. So here it is. Using our local mycology, we think that it's really important. Get to know your species in your area and make sure that you're not dealing with any problematic mycelium, which really there isn't too much. Yeah, armillaria is one that you want to be careful of, and that's the honey mushroom. But pretty much other than that, it can easily go into your ferments. Here's a picture of a beginning of a ferment. We work with fresh plant extract. We make ferments on our property. We use them immediately. We really don't have a need for a shelf life on any of our stuff because we grow seasonally. If we keep any of our mothers, we'll keep some nutrients and maybe we'll do some sprouting and stuff during the winter. But we really feel like fresh is best because there's a tremendous amount of cyanobacteria that's on the outside of your plant leaves and your structure. And if you have gorgeous leaves, then you also know that you have gorgeous microbiology. And that microbiology is all within your plants here. Here's a picture, Josh.
And these are just different inoculants that can go into your soil building. And so doing water hash extractions are really wonderful because you can get, amazing hash out of it, but also the byproduct is really, really usable. And we would turn our leaf back into a bokashi or some kind of a compost, but a lot of times there's a lot of water in there if you're going to make bokashi or something. So we used an apple press to press the water out. And then you can use you can get bokashi or lactic acid in there, and then you can also use it as a soil inoculant in moving forward. And just using fresh leaves in your soil as you're building, or using as a top layer is a beautiful thing, and it's really, really nice to have that as a cycle. So yeah, just compost outside, utilizing leaves. You guys have deciduous trees here everywhere. They're essential because the tap roots go down, and that's your trace minerals. They're going to also provide a lot of life, and the leaf mold is really beneficial to your compost.
And just talking about deciduous trees because you all are so abundant in them. Just like Josh said, it's a minor. You can go out and get a soil test, and maybe it could tell you, what your plant's not uptaking or what's deficient in your soil. And really, you can find all of those answers in tree leaves. They're amazing miners. Utilizing those leaves in the fall time. We have some pure certified farmers that actually go in front of the big trucks, and you just make sure that you would get this from a clean area and just collect all of the leaves in different sort of suburban areas, and they'll just get mounds and mounds of it, and it makes instant soil. So this is going to be something that really remineralizes your soil very quickly, and worms love to eat it. And also, we were talking about wood chips. A lot of this is everywhere. Whenever there's downed wood and in this area, they're chipping it up. Where is it going? Find out where it's going. Find out if it's clean first and it's not something that's been on a roadside. But getting chips, this is like huge piles. Where is this? In California? Oh yeah, in the Gorge in Oregon.
After a major windstorm. And I've seen a lot of landscaping companies in the area, and Leighton talked about it, the tree tips and everything, and just the kind of, that's kind of a resource that's really valuable to you. And carbon sequestration and having carbon in the ground is really essential in creating a more higher fungal soil. And so that's kind of part of longevity and water retention. And so also sawdust is really useful, and you can put that in the aisles or in between your plants. Question? Yeah, so the question is, what about cedar and pine? And then that would be, is it too acidic? And so there is a limitation, to everything. And cedar, pine is different than cedar in a lot of ways. Pine is a lot more assimilable, and pine is often used in horse stalls, and you can get a lot of pine shavings and stuff. And I would say that's pretty readily available and really usable, I would say. With the cedar or something that's a little bit got more oils in it, more acidic, it can definitely be. I mean, if I'm going to throw a number out there, up to 20% or something. I mean, you can put a good portion of that into your beds or into a chipper or into your aisles in between, and let that go over the year, and it's going to break down just fine. And biology is going to come, and the matrix of the biology is going to change everything. So you'll be good with that. Just don't overdo it.
I've heard black walnut contains something that can kill other plants. Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah. Black walnut is one that I wouldn't use. Absolutely, I wouldn't be using any black walnut. It just has super, super high tannins. It's actually great to be used in a foliar spray, and it, can be helpful to get rid of pathogens on your leaves. And eucalyptus is another one that you really don't want to use. That's something that we talk about in California. But black walnut is something that you all have readily available here. But here's a beautiful picture of, a mycelial web. This is readily available. This is on sawdust and chips. So basically, it's like giving your mycelium and your fungi instant food. And we always believe to have different sizes of wood chips, from sawdust all the way to really big, branches is a great idea, because then it makes it readily available for a certain amount of time. And there's certain type of fungi that might be more attracted to, the sawdust than ones that would be attracted to the chips. So what we have found over and over and over again when we go do consulting in, really large cannabis farms or even small cannabis farms, is that when we test the soil, it's incredibly bacterial rich with people that are really on top of it, but their fungi counts are all the way at the ground. They're at the bottom. So we're finding a lot of pathogens and things directly related to that. So having a really large fungal colony as well as a large bacterial diversity is important. And the only way that you're going to get that is by adding diversity in your soil. Because you want to be able to add different food sources for different types of biology. That only makes sense.
And it also is a way of kind of collecting IMOs, sort of slow IMO over the course of a year. If you have wood chips piled up in a certain part of your land, they're going to just grow with the biology that's there. If you put them in between your plants or in between your rows, it's going to be, keep water in, and it's a really good way. You can also, this is inoculated with garden giant King Stropharia. And agriculture is, is a big driver of climate change and waterways going dead and dead zones in the ocean and dead zones that kill fish. So if we can utilize techniques on our land that make it a positive impact on our environment, then that's what makes the most sense to us. So having a really high fungal rich web across your garden, every time it rains, you're gonna, like Elaine Ingham talks about, retaining your nutrients and everything. This is a way to retain your nutrients and also filter the water so that you're not impacting the land in a way that's negative, and you're retaining everything. So that's really important.
One thing that we notice is maybe in the springtime you might be looking for more instant soil, and what kind of things can you do to start off your nursery. And I want to get going on some kind of a soil. I want to be able to have it readily available. You can do a hot compost or a thermophilic compost, and that works. But I think what we can share after homesteading for so many years is that we've really done away with hot composting, because Josh and I always laugh, but it's really true, is that we're really farming for when we're 85. We want to be healthy, and we want to be able to work the same systems that we're working right now, and we want to be just as successful at it when we're 85 as we are now. So the way to do that is to set up really smart systems. And one smart system that's worked for us is just cold composting. And cold composting is just piles all around your property. Let them sit for a year. Let them be outside. If you want to cover them, you can cover them. But also utilizing your beds as your compost, constantly layering. Why go and have compost piles other places when you can just layer right on top of the beds that you already have available, and you really don't have to work at that? And that's something that we're going to be successful at when we're 85. So easy flow. The less time and energy that it takes you to build your soil, build your gardens for more successful yields and successful health is the better thing that you want to do. And we've really found that just adding different layers to the beds is a great idea.
And also just utilizing what you have throughout the year. If someone you might know hunts, or someone has cows and they don't know what to do with their bones, and there's, you know, a way that you can, we don't really recommend burning too much, because I think it's really important to utilize the wood and the carbon without burning. And also with hot composting, it puts a lot of carbon in the air. So hot composting might be a really good thing for propagation soils. I mean, that might make a lot of sense, and that's why mushroom cultivators use hot composting techniques, because it gets rid of all of the seeds, and it can make an easier medium. So hot composting can be utilized, and it does. You do with the thermophilic microorganisms, you do lose some nutrients in that process. So cold composting and static composting and stuff really does retain all the nutrients better. That's going to be your most, like, if you test that afterwards, it's going to have the most life in it. So, but burning bones or shells is a way to slowly unlock the ability for the microorganisms and the roots to utilize it as a home and as a thing. So you can have burns where you put, get it going and then put bones in it and then throw dirt on top of it and then let it slowly burn out. And that can be a way to just slowly burn the bones out and then utilize them in your soils. And also, this is biochar and ash and potash. And you guys, a lot of people have wood stoves over the winter. You can collect a lot out of your wood stoves or something like that. So that's just a good useful item in building soil. Having an outdoor carport is a really useful for indoor gardeners, because it allows you to stop the rain and not get oversaturated. If you're starting a worm farm, there's a certain humidity that makes the most sense to get your biggest breakdown. And having bins that you have different stages at makes a lot of sense, and you can gather your materials from local restaurants or hotels or whatever it is, where you can get stuff from the roadside, but you have to be really careful where you get it from, because it could have residues in it and stuff, so you have to be really mindful of that. But we really recommend for indoor growers that you have some kind of and maybe even in Michigan it does get really cold and stuff, so possibly walls and some kind of an indoor thing makes a lot of sense for worm production and compost production. And this is a worm farm that's outdoors, and it's just simple. It doesn't take much. It takes a little bit of effort to get your system set up, but once you do, it's extremely beneficial to your saving money. So in moving forward and as a business model, indoor growing makes a lot of sense, but having an outdoor plot or being able to utilize your outdoor in your sun, I think we feel is going to be essential in staying profitable as a business model. And we have one, just example here of having a greenhouse and then having some mounds off to the side, and then a tea house that's elevated. And if you have a tea house that's elevated, it just allows you gravity feed, and then you can be up over your garden overlooking everything, and that's it makes a lot of sense. And then maybe you can learn timber framing in the way, and that would be really sweet too.
Also, we've seen, the past 5 years, we've seen the successes and the non-successes. And the thing that is being really talked about is that once cannabis goes federally legal, then we're going to be able to have importation as well as exportation. Importation, and I don't want to be fear-mongering by any means, but I also want to give you all a little bit of a reality check, is that the amount per gram that can be produced in another country as opposed to here is phenomenal. So we really need to have those conversations. Those are sobering conversations that we need to have with each other on how is it that we can get our cost per gram all the way down to where we feel like we can move a little bit and not feel that stress and not be able to sleep at night. And the successes that we've seen in the industry right now are the ones that didn't put much into their gardens at all. So if you have an indoor garden facility, of course your costs are going to be much higher per gram. So why not have a portion of your indoor facility a greenhouse? A light depth greenhouse in Michigan is definitely what we suggest to you all as far as the highest quality product, the highest quality medicinal compounds, the lowest cost, and also something that you all can hit the market with. And I think that that's something to look at. We live up in BC. We understand cold climate. We know short climate. We have the horrible monster of rain come at us on September 1st. So we have to be done. And my suggestion to you all here, and when I've been talking to a lot of people here in this room, is that to be done by September 15th. Light depping. This doesn't mean huge, massive cost. We pull tarps, people. We've been doing that now for 20 years because it's easy for us. And it's something that we can count on. So really look at, what's going on in your daytime and figure out when it's going to be best to cover your greenhouses. And we're going to give you some examples here of how to do it completely low cost. And then just throw some kind of hoops over it and pull a tarp. And that's something that's going to be incredibly viable for Michigan.
And just, give thanks. And we just came back from Thailand, and we were talking about their new medical program and what it means in Thailand to have a new medical program. And they were just saying, oh, well, it's basically a big corporate program because it's universities and corporate companies that are coming in and doing medical. And then they said that they're not going to be able to have enough farms initially, so they're going to have to buy their weed from Canada and Switzerland and send off pallets of weed to different countries, and that's already happening right now. So licensed producers in Canada that are federally legal are shipping their herb to different countries right now, and those countries are also getting ready to ship their herb to Canada because Canada doesn't have the ability to produce enough for their people at this moment in time. So basically what that tells us is to save the small farmer and save the people that really started this all, which is our big mission, and to keep the relevance as this regenerative farming movement plays into it also. Being able to provide, herb at a low price is not, it's an essential thing. So where it's not a fear-mongering thing as much as it is just a reality to understand. And it's a beautiful win-win situation because it allows you to capture, more magic. And that's another thing we're learning with the new laws is opening up of the realization of soil diversity and how it affects the terpenes and the cannabinoids. So hugelkultur, and before when you used to do gardens, it was really just buy a big pile of soil and a bunch of pots and have like a soil that you thought was ready for the whole year and then go, and that would be a huge cost in the beginning of the summer. So for the last 2 years, farms have just really been going into the earth and just really trusting that that's a good thing. And so we're just going to really encourage you to do the same thing. And, there's Sepp Holzer in Austria has shown that even in a really harsh environment, you can grow really amazing things. And we're seeing the benefits in desert climates. We're seeing the benefits in California, Oregon, tropical climates in Bali, even where we were, Jamaica and British Columbia. So it's an essential way to build fungi and utilize rocks in your local area. So we're going to give you a bunch of different examples. One example is if you're on a hillside, you can utilize logs that you're cutting down, and you can inoculate those logs with medicinal mushrooms like reishi, maitake, shiitake, lion's mane. Those are extremely beneficial mushrooms, but you have to use green trees. You can't use trees that have been down for a long time because you have to seal them off. So there's a process to learning spawn culture. But if you lay those logs down and grow that, you have a secondary product.
And having secondary products is another way that we're all going to stay in this industry. So what else can you grow from your land? Last night we were talking on the panel about how horrible monocropping and monoculturing is, and same with monoeconomy. We need to have poly-economy, poly products. What other things are you growing on your farm that is coming into fruition when cannabis isn't? So that you can have a little push to get you until, cannabis season. Strawberries, phenomenal price. Organic strawberries, they grow well here. Blueberries, any kind of berry. You know, what is it that's going to grow well on your farm that you're going to have as a secondary product? That's super, super important. Because then you're not pulling out your hair and wondering what the price per pound or per gram is going to be when you come to harvest in the fall time. So we really encourage that. Here's a picture of a really super easy living planter. This is something that you can do, you know, just by using the biology and what you have around in your area. Here was an example of what Josh had just done a photo of before, of taking a hillside. This was a bunch of downed trees from fire in California. They're dealing with a whole lot of fire in Northern California. And a lot of farmers were left thinking, oh, well, what am I going to do with these half-burned logs? Well, they've created incredible opportunities. And out of a lot of those burned logs and burned land is hope. And this is a perfect picture of hope. And this garden was made just in a couple of days. And that's all with down. And this was immediately planted. And all of the dirt was turned into soil right there on the property and was planted. And they had an incredible year. And this is Heart Rock Mountain. This is another example of what you can use. You know, a lot of us have wood-fired stoves, I believe, here in Michigan. And it really gums up your stove with a lot of creosote to have, you know, the outside of the tree. So here we've just taken some cordwood and made an instant bed. It's that easy. And this is going to be digested by fungi in about 4 years, so then you can just add more. So not only is it becoming an ability to hold water, it holds microorganisms, it holds nutrients, it holds humidity in your soil. And this is something that just can be made right on your own property.
Just covering the ground and layering and covering the ground and layering, and the breakdown, you can then, after that straw breaks down over the course of like 1 or 2 months even, you can just take a hoe and just kind of, you know, pile it up on your bed underneath plants. And it's basically like a compost pile in between all your beds. So really, I mean, we have compost piles, and it's basically, to get us the biomass is the big thing. So that's why polyculture is so important, and thinking about, you know, natural environments, which we talked about, because the mass goes away fast. And, you know, so that this eats up, you know, amount of hay. And during the summer, we can cover that 2 or 3 times. And it turns into worm food. You know, so with hugelkultur, there's more than one ways of doing it. You should, like Leighton talked about the perk test, and that's a really good idea to think about. You know, you should look at your dirt and the soil that you have on your area and assess what you have, because you might want to dig in and put logs in the ground, or you might want to mound it on top based off your local area. If there's too much clay, mounding it on top is going to transform the dirt in between your aisles. And so also using it, and by putting it into the ground, you can utilize it as a swale, which will soak in your groundwater during rainstorms, and it'll help divert the groundwater and charge up the wood that's in the soil. So thinking about your area and what you have, what kind of sticks that you have. Maybe if you have more acidic type of sticks, that would be something you would bury, you know, in a little bit more. And then as you're building your hugel beds, then you're kind of starting to get to more usable material towards the top, because once you really just need a buffer of good soil for the plants to start. Once the plant, like roots start, they can really dig into some pretty raw material. It's pretty phenomenal to go from the mindset of finished super soil to soil that's pretty raw underneath. And it's amazing after 1 year. We've seen incredible changes after 1 year on farms, like phenomenal whole earth changes. And that's phenomenal. Here's Green Source Gardens, the beginning of their journey, which was a 1 acre, 1.5 acre, is it, I think, where they utilized their forest. They have 80 acres, and they just simply built on top of their dirt. And I'm sure you've seen their journey, and it's really, really beautiful. And it's just laying down and having, utilizing the carbon-nitrogen ratio is really important with hugelkultur, because it can be overdone with too much carbon. You know, I mean, roots don't grow through wood chips. So I mean, you have to use some intelligence in the way that you put it together. So if you're utilizing really raw material like raw logs and carbon, it makes a lot of sense to use some kind of high nitrogen manures or some kind of plant material to kind of initialize the breakdown. But this is digging the side of the earth on top of the sticks to be able to utilize the living soil and the native soil in your area.
And this was their very first year, and this is a really good example of what you all are looking at here in Michigan, is that once you get all of your licenses and, oh my God, we got everything all dialed, and we finally, oh God, I got the license, and then you don't have any money left. And I don't know if you all are dealing with that, but that's definitely what a lot of cannabis industry people are dealing with, and that's definitely how Green Source Gardens, so they bought their land, and then they just said, well, how are we going to turn it into a garden? And this is what they did. This is another picture of exactly the same story. A hemp farmer that, had gotten all of his licensure, finally got the land, was ready to set up, and he really didn't have any money. So what can I do? And this was a suggestion that we gave, and this was his very first year in growing. And that year, I think he produced 300 pounds just in this 1 acre of hemp off of zero money. Lots of energy, but zero money. And that's something, and really healthy, incredible crop. And what? Oh yeah, not utilizing plastic here, and we've been encouraging this particular farmer, who is also Pure certified, to take out those aisles. So those aisles then are going to be becoming the cold compost piles like we were talking about. If you just layer your aisles over and over and over again throughout the season with all of your weeds or whatever you want, then you can take that layer and you can dig it and put it right on top. And that becomes, beautiful soil. And this is an example of that garden and what it did in 1 year. Yep. And here's our farm. This was a 1 year, we decided that we wanted to have more pollinator gardens, as many pollinator gardens as we can, because we know that the gardens that survived this bong aphid, the hemp aphid that a lot of people are having, which we've actually heard in Switzerland, that there's more weight per pound, or more weight to a plant in aphids than there is in flowers when they cut it down. Yeah, it's gross. But then you go to the neighbors who's doing all regenerative practices, who's got tons of pollinator species and all different types of plants that are feeding a lot of different pollinators, have zero aphids. None. Because parasitical wasps and different wasps, which is what you learned about from Suzanne, can eat, tremendous amount of aphids in one day. So how do we keep clean gardens? Well, it's not really up to us. Let's just watch what nature has done, what Mother Nature has given us. But this is a great example of a 1 year. We just sort of put a little bit of the native soil around in our area, rolled out, a straw bale, and planted a bunch of zinnias. And we saw tremendous amounts of growth on our whole property just by adding this. This is just a zinnia garden. I love breeding zinnias. Pollinators. And also, this is little bee houses for the minor bees, and finding out what it is that pollinator species like, getting to know your pollinators too. Talk about it with your kids. Find out, we talk about learning a new language, and if you learn just one word a day, well, there's a new language in entomology too. Just learn a new insect every day and what it does, what it likes to feed on, and where it likes to live, and try to help create those spaces for them.
Just creating natural habitat is your biological control. As much as you can get help from something like a passive system, the better off you are. And indoors, that's a different environment. We're going to go into how to, build some soils on the indoor as well to mimic this on the inside. This is an example of building a simple hoop house and taking straw and local native soils and just basically making a layer cake within 1 year, and then just being able to grow plants right in it and having incredible health, and here's another example of doing a garden raw. Then we use squash to do it the first year. So crop rotate, if you have the ability to move around a little bit, crop rotations is really essential in keeping health. Whenever you have, big areas of one thing, you're asking for problems. So we utilize some hugelkultur through squash and corn, because that can be used with pretty hot compost. So this is just raw, this is rose bushes and elderberries and hawthorn and apple trees and fir trees, and also fresh fir branches, and then it's covered with compost that we made we have one farm that we get a lot of our compost from, which is a totally natural farm. So we do have that one farm that we get anything else that doesn't grow on our farm to inoculate it, and so covered it. And then this is planted it, and the compost was pretty warm, so it was kind of a transition of the roots being okay, but the roots took really well, and then we grew a huge amount. It's kind of hard to see, but it was just a whole sea of just thousands of pounds of squash, and we have potatoes growing in the background, and garlic growing and everything. So it's, that's our diversity, and that's our security through food, and that's our security also with the ganja. Go ahead.
What kind of material you use to cover your greenhouse there?
We have a poly weave. Yeah, so that's a really good, we like that kind of plastic because it's a good diffusion of sunlight, and it just kind of spreads the light around.
And I wanted to say something really quick, just because your region and zone is really similar to what we all are dealing with, is that, after all of these years of learning, we take the plastic off every year. Because we've found that the plastic, the gardens that we take the plastic off, it just thrives more than the ones that we've left dry all winter. So let it go through the natural cycle of the snow, of the rain, and it starts to, gather more microbiology. So and you're saving yourself tons of money by not allowing a cold snowstorm and cold and hot weather on that greenhouse. It's going to last a whole lot longer. So taking the time and energy just to take it off during the winter time has been very successful for us. Here's an example of an indoor-outdoor sort of greenhouse. It's a really... Yeah, it's a hybrid greenhouse. And this is a funny story, is that they bought this greenhouse, and it had concrete on the bottom, and they just said, this isn't going to work for us. We're not having success in this greenhouse because the other greenhouses that we have going on are directly touching the earth, and they're just thriving and yielding tons more. This was a continuous problem, this greenhouse. So they came in with a jackhammer, and they jackhammered out these beds, and are not having those problems anymore.
And part of that is the greenhouse companies, they give you a blueprint that says, this is what your foundation looks like, and this is what's gonna, this is part of the permit process and stuff. So sometimes it's knowing the rules, and maybe you build your greenhouse a certain way, but this is coming after the fact. Here's another example of just, connecting it to the earth. And the pots, like, we've talked about, they dry out too fast, and it's hard to keep your biology stable, and that's what this can do. And then you can put inoculated logs in between, if you want, of mushrooms, and then cover crops. And then, if you have the sides open in the days, then it allows pollinators to go through the greenhouses. So here's Green Life Productions in Nevada, and a lot of people ask if you can have a natural system indoors and if it can pass tests, because that's a big issue. And the Green Life Productions is doing it in Nevada, and they've done it for a long time. A lot of you guys know about them because they've been around for a long time, but it's just a really good example of soil building, soil testing, learning what your soil is, learning how to utilize your cover crops. We talked about, last night, how cover crops can also be, potential problem in your system. So, utilize them with intelligence and utilize them as an indicator to what's going on. It's not just put a cover crop off and walk away 2 weeks later, come back and hope everything's good. So, and also with cover crops, which this is just in between right now. This is their last harvest on the bed, and then a fresh planting. And then you can grow cover crops. So cover crops that are really young and then just pulled up and put on the ground are really healthy, because plants that are really young and really vigorous are less likely to attract pests. They're less likely to, it takes a type of colonization for pests to get on plants. So super long-term indoor cover crops really can become a problem, and I think that's something to really utilize. But the purpose of a living soil is to have that in there, because you really have to have something for the soil to live on. So I don't think we can totally bypass having cover crops on the inside, but I think it's something that you really should pay attention to.
And just to touch on cover crops, what we do is we do many, many rotational cover crops throughout our season, many. And we look at all of the different values of the minerals of, that particular plant and seeding that we're doing. And we like to start with chickweed or clover at the very beginning of the cycle. They're very awesome nitrogen fixers. You can do peas. Peas are a wonderful indicator to find out how much, if you have any pathogens or any problems in your environment, because they're really sensitive. So if you're wondering about glyphosate, or you're wondering about different pesticides or anything that has been on the soil, plant peas. It's going to tell you. They should come up nice and green and vigorous immediately. So planting seeds is just really wonderful. Peas is a great indicator. So we start with our chickweed, we start with our peas, start with a little bit of clover, and then we let it get about that big. And then we pull it out, and then we move on to buckwheat, because buckwheat grows so great in the really hot system and hot environment. So maybe as June and July is starting to come on and the plants are still vegetating, buckwheat is amazing. Fenugreek is really great as well. What is it that you can find that's cheap and easy? We've had way more success with seeds than grains, and I want to tell you why. Grains have a tremendous amount of carbohydrate and sugars within them. And it can draw beneficials as easily as it can draw pathogens. So we just suggest that if you're going to be doing a cover crop, or you're going to be rotating your cover crop species, to really stick with seeds. Seeds have a much higher nutrient value, and it's sort of infinite possibilities of a full spectrum, mineral that it can give your plants as well. So then we move into fenugreek, and then end with, at the very end of the cycle, is end with poppy. Poppy seeds contain the highest amount of phosphorus than any other plant on the planet. And if you just grow them up that much and you pull it out and you put it right down on your soil, then that's going to be readily available phosphorus to your plant as soon as it's doing that transitional change into flowering. Yeah. Rip the roots right out. That's what we do. We rip the roots out, and then we go and replant right over it. Yep, and that's worked well for us.
There are examples where cutting the tops and leaving the roots in the ground can, build the roots more, and that can be a way, there is a technique to cutting it and stuff. So I think it's, learn what, you're using. And outdoors, I think that makes a lot more sense, like out in the fields, because then you're, really getting the atmospheric, work into the soil, and then the roots can be really dug in. But I think the idea of green manure and stuff is just pulling it out young and just going with new seeds. Yeah.
And also, you're going to create a nice aeration for those top roots, which really like a lot of that oxygen. And then it's going to create a wonderful environment for the next planting, and it's phenomenal. Like, you'll be pulling up those little babies, that are maybe about that big, and then you'll come back 4 days later, and it's fully digested when you have a really healthy soil system. So it gives those roots that are up at the top, a lot of really easy nutrients in a very quick way. Now we're going to move on to animals. We have had animals, and we currently have animals on our farm now. And the relationship of human agriculture, animals are amazing. They can be incredibly helpful. And we've been sort of laughing because we've seen a lot of changes in this industry. And we say that the alpaca is the new pit bull to the cannabis industry, which is really cool, because it used to be that you would go up to a cannabis farm and you'd be greeted by, maybe 8 pit bulls, and now you're greeted by 8 alpacas. So the alpacas, we've noticed tremendous changes on a lot of the pure certified farms just in 1 year on inviting in animals. And really think about, do the research. look at what's going to do really well in your area and your region and talk about what animals in your region maybe need to be saved. A lot of the cannabis farms out on the West Coast have become wonderful homes for animals that have been mistreated in the industry. So maybe we can be helpful to that too. So just bringing in hay and straw turns out amazing manure that can be top dressed just right onto your beds. And we really like that. We do that all the time. That's what I was talking about with cold composting, is that if we see manure, just throw it right on the top, because that's easy. We don't have to be doing all of these different processes to get the same result. And this is just beautiful cover crop that's growing right out of manure, llama manure. And this is goat. And this is, I mean, you can see this is just one year. This is just during the winter season at how much this goat manure has had. So if you have goats and you're constantly thinking about layering, well, then you're making your compost pile right in your animal pens. And that's something that we do also with our chickens, is that we only take all of the bedding out of our chicken coop once a year, because we've been piling it with LAB, IMO, different straw, then we do the manure, then the chicken poop, and just keep piling and piling. And when we pull it all out, it's totally readily available soil that the chickens have been working through all season long.
And also, do you have a question?
I don't know if you're taking questions.
Yeah, sure.
So my sheep, I've got Icelandics too, and I feed them cannabis all winter.
Nice.
And I take the they're fermentation tanks, right?
Yeah.
Ambulance, they're fermenting all that. Should I be putting that in my brewer? Absolutely.
Yeah, so he said he has Icelandic sheep as well, and just the act of feeding the sheep is like a fermentation. The gut of the sheep is fermenting the food as well as it's taking what it needs, and then the poop is, so amazing, and you can use it as a top dress, but he's wondering if he can brew it. And I think that's a great idea. I think you can utilize those enzymes and water, and and that can add oils and stuff, like Elaine was talking about the other day, having oils. Can be a fungal food source, so I think that's really good. In Jamaica, I was just going to say, with the goats and everything, they have a lot of goats on Jamaica. This is not Jamaica, but the oil in the poop is something that can transfer into the oils of the plants. It's just kind of like a roots belief. So using manures that are high in oils can be really beneficial.
And it's more than just a roots idea, is that a lot of the most productive and amazing lavender farms in France only use sheep manure. And the reason why they only use sheep manure is because that is going to produce the highest terpene plant. So they're only making essential oil out of that. So sheep, goats, alpacas, these really help bring out terpene ratios in your plants. And maybe when you're feeding them, you want to be planting certain types of biomass, and that's what we're going to get into next. So planting biomass on your own property is something that is totally imperative for closed-loop farming practices. Okay, so here we are dealing with polyculture. Here's some basil is wonderful. It grows like crazy. It can be something that you put in your kitchen. It's something that you can dry. You can use it as a ferment. Nettle, it's fantastic. I think we have other pictures of nettle. So just more polyculture and the importance of it. Here's a big fat daikon. Leighton was talking about planting radishes. Well, here's Craig from Alpenglow Farms, and he was just starting a first-time bed, so he planted the whole entire bed in radishes to be able to break up the under soil, and then he just planted directly into this, the following year. Here's just plant diversity. These plants, we did a comparative study. How much money does each plant cost us to grow every year? And maybe each plant produces, maybe around 5 pounds. We're not in California. We don't get the massive sun, more like, what you all can do. And we did the cost evaluation, and each plant cost us $24. So that's $24 to 5 pounds. Yeah. Huh? We produce our own seed. So what the $24 was for predators. And also we only bring one thing onto our property, and that's C90. SEA 90. We really believe in it. It's a 90 trace mineral. We believe that we're mineral deficient, our soils are mineral deficient, our plants are mineral deficient, our animals are mineral deficient, and this is something that you can bring onto your property and have full spectrum mineral.
Essentially making a seawater ferment like Chris talked about, and C90 is dehydrated seawater from the Sea of Cortez, and it has, it says on the, that it can have up to 50,000 organisms in it when it comes alive, along with the 84 trace minerals and 6 rare earth elements because of the ocean. So, it's just a really good thing for foliar spraying and adding to FPJ. Oh, and we eat it. Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's important for us. Yeah? So, I think it's important for seawater and kelp and everything. We use kelp in our Dragonfly products, and when we get kelp, we always test it at the highest testing for toxicity. And the areas that we get them from are tested to human health and toxicity in it. So oceans are really toxed out, especially near cities. And so I think that's a hesitation for us to gather seawater. I think it matters where you're from. I think with, we're talking about, clean cannabis and good food streams and testing soils and testing waters. But when you buy a fish, have you ever seen like a water test? I mean, is there any toxicity reports to fish and stuff? So I think that's why this feels good to use something like a C90, because it has a test on it. I mean, I think if you're in Hawaii or you're in some place where there's like a lot of current and the water is clean, I think that can be a beautiful thing. I mean, why not get it from the source? And I want to believe in the Mother Ocean, as a positive thing. I just think that it's extremely toxed out, especially, even, by Bellingham being in between Seattle and Washington. I mean, I would be really careful of that and pay attention to your algae blooms and different things that happen in the areas. A lot of things come up with crustaceans and stuff like that. And using shrimp meal and crab meal is something we're also really careful about in our soils and our mixtures, even though it has chitin, so does fungi. Fungi is made of chitin, so I don't think we're really careful about the inputs, so good question. Yeah, so anyway, secondary products, growing something underneath your cannabis is really important, but nettles is one of our favorite things in life.
And nettles is something that you all can readily grow here in Michigan, and those of you who don't have nettle gardens, get one. Yeah, oh yeah. And planting nettle seed is easy to do, but also just grabbing a little bit of the rhizome and planting it in areas that, it really makes depleted areas very rich. And this is an example of just one patch of nettle that we had. This was cut 4 times in 1 year. So this is the final growth of what it looks like in the fall time. So this was cut 4 different times, so that means it made 4 big, beautiful brews. Nettle is a full spectrum nutrient. It has all minerals in it. It has, wonderful polysaccharides. It's great lignans in it, silicates. I could go on, and it's a wonderful feeder from the beginning of the cycle of your gardens all the way to the very end. And it feeds nutrients, or feeds microbes really easily. Here's a picture of its rhizomes. This is what I was talking about, that can be replanted into areas, just very shallow, probably only about 1 inch to 1.5 inches on the edge of your gardens, or in areas that's a little bit shady, or make sure that it's a damp area too. Nettles really likes a lot of dampness in its early growth. It can handle drought situations more like in the August times. That's fine, but its roots need to get, really in there. Yeah. Can you use what?
Aquarium salt. What would be an aquarium salt that's different than, is that like a table? So, I mean, basically for salts, what you're looking for is organisms and nutrient, and trace minerals. So that's why something from the ocean, or a living an earth salt, from the Himalayas. So being in the middle of nowhere, there's someone probably still delivering mail to that person, and you can order stuff online, and that might be smart to do. So yeah, so look for organisms. Find out on the aquarium salt what's in it.
And a good example to that is that there's only like up to 5 trace minerals in regular sea salt, and there's 17 trace minerals in pink Himalayan salt, and this C90 is 90 trace minerals. So not every salt is treated equally, and not every salt is bad for you. It's actually very important that all of us have high mineral salt every day. It's what will keep our metabolism and things going properly. Here's a beautiful picture of comfrey. Comfrey is another one. It's a wonderful bioaccumulator. You can plant it. It grows like crazy. A lot of people always say, oh, I'm so worried about it. It's going to take over certain gardens. Well, if you can harvest it 3 or 4 times, then you're just cheering. It's fantastic. It makes beautiful soil underneath it. It has a lot of wonderful nutrients to it. It melts easily inside of a ferment, and that's what we work with personally. We're going to have some pictures up here.
This is an example of cannabis plants. So those are old stalks from last year, and this is a big pile of compost. And then we have the accumulation coming up into the comfrey. Chickweed is something that grows as a seed. It's something that's really easy to eat. It's good in salads. It's good to put in teas, and it also is a good ground cover. A lot of times it's wild, but you can get seed for it. It creates a mycelial mat underneath it.
Horsetail, fantastic, awesome, wonderful. You can use it in all of your different fermented plant juices. You can use it as a foliar. We highly suggest to use it as a foliar. We've done a lot of observational research from year to year. Plants that we spray with a horsetail tea at the very beginning of its inception all the way through doesn't have any problems at all. And the ones that we didn't spray, they might have problems. So this is a really wonderful protective silicate coating over your plants so that the cyanobacteria really can thrive on a lot of the different minerals that are sprayed on there with the horsetail, or that are inside the horsetail. Another picture of horsetail. Bracken fern. Ferns, wonderful source of phosphorus. We talk about how phosphorus can only be found in phosphates. Untrue. Plants uptake lots of different nutrients and minerals in the soil, and ferns take up a lot of phosphorus. So you can use this in your soil. You can use it in your different ferments. And again, we were talking earlier about leaves and the importance of leaves in the fall time. They're wonderful mineral accumulators. And different trees have different types of mineral accumulation in it. Here's Tulsi basil. We really love to put as much terpene-rich nutrient biomass into our fermenters and into our soil as we possibly can. We are getting super high terpene counts in all of our flour, all of it, like really high. So we think that it's important to have terpene-rich plants because then maybe it will remind the plant to uptake terpenes. Calendula, wonderful plant. It grows like crazy. It contains lots of wonderful omega oils in it that are great for your soil, that are great from certain types of microorganisms and different fungi. Here's a plant that actually, really draws a lot of bacteria, but also fungi because of its oils. So it's pretty interesting flower. Yeah.
Ma'am, is there say you're trying to source local stuff, is there something that would tell me what I could source that would have terpene levels in it? That might be a dumb question.
Okay, so the question was, what could I source that might have terpene levels in it? Terpenes are a smell. So the more smelly the plant is, then you're going to have higher terpenes in it. It's a great question. And so you really want to go for really good aromatic plants to make sure that there's a certain percentage, or maybe 30% or 20% in your soils that you're working with aromatics. Because it has tips of any of the pine trees or the fir trees. They contain a tremendous amount of ascorbic acid. And it's funny because at the time that these are blooming in the early spring is exactly the time that your plants and all your gardens really could use a wonderful foliar of this beautiful ascorbic acid. Yet again, a wonderful terpene-rich plant that you can utilize. Roses. Roses have a lot of different oils in them. Another wonderful aromatic. In our area, we have a lot of wild rose, so we use the wild rose plants, we use the flowers, and it just seems to, it's something we have readily available. Borage, wonderful for pollinators. Also another one that is a bacteria feeder as well as a fungi feeder because of the omega oils in it. Very high in omegas. Very easy to grow, and the pollinators just freak out on it. This one is elder, or valerian, sorry, my brains. So this is valerian. Valerian has like thousands of years of information on it as far as you can use it in a foliar spray. It's used in lots of different biodynamic preps. If you use it in a foliar spray, then it's really said to draw a lot of really beneficial cyano and different compounds, different microbiology from the air.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
My valerian plant got powdery mildew last year, and I pulled it out because they told me it'll always have it, and I didn't want it to be on my property then. And now there's a bunch of little babies coming up this year. Are those kids going to be safe to use?
Yeah, they're absolutely going to be safe. The question is that her valerian that she had at her house had powdery mildew. She took it out, and now there's new babies coming up. Well, those babies might have a resistance to the powdery mildew for all we know. So just watch for it and make sure that it's okay. But
And maybe add some compost or some kind of fresh soil on top of it to kind of, change the environment underneath it. It might have been that the soil was, a little dried out in that area, and it kind of lent itself to that powdery mildew. So maybe you can do a little bit to your soil preparation underneath it. So the next one here is yacon, and yacon is a really amazing plant that's come into our life, and it's Y-A-C-O-N. It's from South America. It's one of the lost food of the Incas, and the reason why we like it is because it's super sugary. It's really sweet. It has a lot of inulin in it and polysaccharides. It has a lot of leaf matter, a lot of biomass, which you can use in teas. And if you grate and juice the yacon tubers afterwards, it's really easy to make a molasses out of it, and it almost tastes exactly like molasses. So it's a way you can make your own sweetener, which is really, really awesome if you want to make some Korean natural farming and you want to do it from your own thing. It's also a good way to build soils and break up the soils as well, like the daikon.
And we really only use yacon as our sweetener. We don't use sugars in a lot of our fresh fermented teas, really because we use it fresh. A lot of times sugars are used to stabilize it on a shelf. But one thing that I think is important to talk about with sugar is that sugars feed a lot of pathogens as well as it can spark beneficials at the very beginning. And you just want to be really careful about what kind of sugars that you're using in your ferments. And we really have found that the sugars that are in the fresh plant is enough to be able to spark the microbiology that we're looking for. And we can see that under a microscope, and we can see it when we taste the teas. We can see it in the way that the teas look and it's bubbling up. So really having whatever sweeteners that you're going to use in your garden, in your kitchen, as well as what you're going to be using in your own, gardens, I really suggest to be minimal on your sugars, because in all of the health and the knowledge that I know, I'm a midwife as well as I have a whole lot of naturopathic experience, and we've done clinics all over the world, free clinics for women and children, and I've really noticed a lot of disease and problems with sugar, and I've also seen that same thing in people's ferments and when they're using it improperly. So just be really careful about your sugar content. And if you're bringing in sugar, then what type of microorganisms is that sugar feeding? Something to think about. So, yeah. Oh, I think it's fantastic. He said, is there anything to be done with tapping maple trees to be using sugar water? Sugar water is a fantastic source. It's closed loop. It's biologically intelligent. It's going to grow the right kind of organisms that you're looking for on your land, especially if you're tapping your trees right there on your land. It's a wonderful sugar source. And it also ferments really quickly, so you want to be able to use it fresh or keep it in the fridge or keep it cold.
Question?
I was just gonna say, yeah, my sap water always turns to vinegar, which I use.
Right. Yeah.
But I've always had a hard time storing it for the season.
Yeah, his sap water turns sour after not too long, and so it's just how to utilize it. And I think maybe cooking it down, So that's the thing about the water is that it's uses quite a bit of water, to cook it down, like 100 gallons to one or whatever it is. But also birch trees are another thing you can tap. We've done that and gotten amazing water out of it. So yeah, utilizing the water out of the birch tree or the maple tree is going to give you a lot of those trace minerals and stuff that's in the ground, and I think that's really super smart.
Yeah, that's smart. He pours it on his compost piles. That's smart. Here's a picture of skunk cabbage. Well, maybe let me get through this. So this is skunk cabbage. This is something that also grows here in Michigan in the early spring. As far as I'm concerned, whatever terpene that cannabis has, skunk cabbage has. It's whenever you go by a big skunk cabbage patch, it just smells like a fresh ganja patch to me. Oxalic acid, it's wonderful. It will totally shut down our system. It's not something that we want to eat or ingest because it really can hurt our liver and our kidneys. But oxalic acid helps draw calcium out of the soil and helps make more readily available to plants. So this is another wonderful thing. It grows massive. And if you go in the area, we really suggest that anytime that you're taking biomass from one area or region, you also take a small little handful of soil, because that handful of soil has all of the intelligence to break down that skunk cabbage because it's there where the skunk cabbage is growing. So not only can it grow the skunk cabbage, but it can also help break down the skunk cabbage. And that's what we do with anything that we're utilizing in any of our ferments or in our soils. I always take a little bit of soil as an indigenous microorganism that's intelligent to that particular plant, and I put it into the soils or the ferments. Aloe. Anyone who doesn't have it growing should. It's wonderful. And I just think that it's a great idea. Go get a small plant, drink it. Use it, for all of your cloning. Use it it's wonderful in any foliars. Plants really love it, as well as the bacteria on the outside of the plants. Yeah? The question was just, do we have a publication that we use? How do we get our plants? How do we get our seeds? Go to your local farmer's market. You're going to find the most intelligent to this area and this particular diversity in this environment is going to be at your local farmer's markets. Or go to somebody that's an amazing gardener and say, hey, what works in this area? I see that you're having a lot of success. What is it that works? Aloe is not a plant that grows here year-round. It's only going to be something that's an annual. So this is an exemption of utilizing what's already native to your zone and area. Yeah.
Strictly Medicinal's online has a lot of medicinal plants, and that's something you can take a look at, for adding something into the area that might not be here. Peace Seedlings is another one that has a lot of really good food. And different varieties on that as well. The OG Plant online or Sweetleaf Organics in Oregon has a whole bunch of yacone crowns. We didn't get into it, but the yacones started from crowns. The tuber is what you use, but where the tuber grows out of the crowns, and that's what you save each year. So you save that over winter. Question? Sweetleaf Organics in Oregon, or the OG Plant on Instagram. Yeah. And you had a question in the back, did you? Still have a question? Yeah. Well, I mean, if it's composted leaves, I mean, you could have it be, a huge percentage of if it could just be all from leaf compost, that's going to be an amazing resource. And even being able to find a part of your forest that's been growing for, 1,000 years, there might be a pretty good cache of dirt in there, and you could, use that to seed your gardens or anything like that. So leaf mold is really a gold thing. And then utilizing leaves in new soils and stuff like that, that's kind of a carbon ratio thing that you'd have to, utilize. It could, be a little much in a in a bed of dirt, but if it's been breaking down for a year or longer, then it's going to break down super fast and be really good for worm farms too.
Turkey rhubarb, another wonderful source of phosphorus. It grows like crazy. Rhubarb loves Michigan. So it's a great mass for your gardens. And here is some oca. We put this picture in here because we saw a lot of sumac trees. You all have a whole lot of sumac. So as we were driving around, we saw the sumac. It's wonderful as a foliar. It's a great aromatic. It's another one that's great terpene residue or terpene counts, as well as it has a tremendous amount of ascorbic acid. And it's just really nice as a foliar to put into a ferment as well. And it's great for our own human consumption of vitamin C. And this is cannabis roots. Cannabis roots are equally as important to put into your soils, your ferments, your medicines, as the actual cannabis flower or the cannabis leaves. It has different types of cannabinoids than even the flowers have. So that's something that really completes the whole cycle. Whenever I make medicine, I always make sure that I put as much below as I put in above, because then I know that I've got the full cycle of that plant present in the medicine, which is going to bring a higher medicinal value to our customers and our patients. Here's our LAB. So we originally would get our milk from our neighbor. And we would go through the whole LAB process. We use labs in our ferments, but that's just one of the many different inoculants that we'll use in our ferments. So having LAB, like Chris was saying, every 3 months, you want to always be cycling it, and that's a good idea. And here's how we start our process. We chop all of our plant matter up. Did you want to talk about this?
So we've gone through the biomass and you know, some of the things that you can grow for your cannabis guild in the area. And the way that we liquefy it is just by chopping it up and using an open fermentation process and using the lactic acid bacteria. So basically, we really concentrate on the soil building and having a really good soil. And then having, you know, the fermented plant juice is a really good green juice to kind of put into, you know, a really carbon-rich soil. So it's kind of a balance. You can overdo it during flower cycles for sure, but it's going to give you a tremendous amount of growth, and it's extremely useful on the property. And you can go through a lot of material. This is burdock, which is burdock root is an invasive species in our area, and the government pays people to eradicate it. So we were getting these truckloads of burdock, and that's also high in phosphorus as a root, and it's also really good for our blood. But we're able to chop that up and put, you know, they have giant leaves and put that into teas. So we utilize plant teas a lot.
Also, I just interviewed Dr. Russo, and this just came out last week. He recommends burdock root because he says that it supports the endocannabinoid system. He says that it's not fun to eat. He says, but you should eat it whenever you can.
Exactly. We really promote the growing of burdock. It also is a beautiful big root, and it can break up the soils. An old Irish horse farmer in our area, who's an amazing person, you know, uses the burdock root in his soups and everything every day, and he's an amazing, healthy person.
Yeah, and the reason why burdock is so good for our endocannabinoid system is because it helps break stagnation in our body by cleaning our blood. So burdock is actually not only imperative to have in your gardens, but also in your kitchen. And it is actually delicious if you roast it and make a tea out of it. So there's a lot of different ways. I really love burdock also. You know, you can cook it just like a root. It's really delicious and wonderful. And, you know, that's something to look at. There's cycling that's happening throughout the year, and a lot of things that come to fruition at the end of the season are really high in phosphorus, and ones that come to fruition at the beginning of the season are really high in nitrogen. It's like you just watch nature, and nature is already saying, hey, this is what you need to put in your plants this week, or hey, this is what you need to eat this week. So I think that eating seasonally and using nutrients seasonally is really working with the intelligence of our own system as well as the intelligence of your garden. Marigolds, wow, they're so beautiful. They're amazing, wonderful terpene rich. They grow like crazy. Pollinators love them. grow marigolds. Thistle. Thistle is an incredible nutrient. It contains so many valuable nutrients, super high in calcium, really high in cobalt, high in magnesium, high in manganese. So right here, we're just a simple stump. We're chopping it all up. Right here, you can see that we're doing a flowering tea because there's apples in the background, which is a wonderful source for fruiting and flowering potassium as well. So this is the time of season that our plants are really looking for these kind of nutrients, and this is what's readily available at that time.
With the apples, you have to be careful that it doesn't go alcohol, turn to alcohol. So that's something you really just kind of use for like 1 week and then get rid of and just use it as a, compost afterwards. So yeah, this is, as the season goes along, you start getting into flower petals and wild yarrows and the cannabis itself and the comfrey, and then that's where the polyculture comes in. It's the mulch, it's the tea, it's the soil building, it's the environment for the plants. And then after about 1 week with a really good fermentation, all the bubbles come in and you start to have the local yeast strands and kind of like making, sauerkraut or making sourdough, and every area is different. Your teas can add, a unique smell and a unique terpene to your region. So open fermenting is a way of collecting your local wild yeasts.
And I just really wanted to say we've been now almost 3 decades into doing closed loop farming like this. This is what works for us. We're not in opposition to any other type of practices. We've done a whole lot of KNF. We've been doing KNF since 2008. These are our trials and tribulations of what works. We also have done a lot of ancient Japanese fermentation. Sandor Katz has a tremendous amount of information on different types of ferments as well. And this is just what works for us. And the reason why we're sharing it with you today is because Michigan is so great, because it could also be working for you all in your environment. And here's a fermentation process. One thing I wanted to back up on is that we do use an LAB. We'll also use an IMO. We'll use handfuls of dirt from different areas on our property. We'll use a little bit of compost. These are all different inoculants that we want to bring more and more diversity into this brew. Our son, he likes to fish. These are some bull trout. So we'll smoke the meat, and then we'll take all of the leftovers and we'll turn it into a fish hydrolysate just right on our own property, because it's closed loop for us. This is just right at the bottom of our property. And you can see that this is a tea that's starting to be complete and done. This is a silicate layer that now becomes completely readily available to all the microbiology. This is separated from the plant and created a silicate right on the top. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, so the process is that we'll usually, during a hot summer month, it'll be about 6 to 7 days of fermentation, which is an anaerobic fermentation. So we chop it all up, we put equal amounts of water, equal amounts of plant material. We let it sit there for about 5 to 7 days. If it's a colder season, it can go all the way from 10 days to 2 weeks, because warmth is going to bring more microbiology, into the ferment. And you can really tell when that ferment is done because it starts bubbling up and you can start seeing some green water. We don't mess with the ferment, we just leave it there. We might take a stick and very gently push the plant material back in that's risen up to the top, but it's not something that we mess with too much. And then we take that, I think we've got pictures of it. Oh no. Okay, and then we take the fermentation and we just take a bucket. So we've got 2 250-gallon tanks, one that's the fermenter, and then one that's going to be our bubbler and our aerator. So we're going to take all of the fermentation water with a bucket, and we're going to bucket it into the empty 250-gallon tank. That we're going to strain it into there, leave the plant material in the fermenter. So one's a fermenter, one's a bubbler. Take the water or the tea and put it in there, and then we're going to bubble it for 12 to 24 hours. Aeration is going to kill off any anaerobic compounds that we might be worried about in our root zone. So then it becomes a completely available tea right away. You can test it under a microscope. We highly suggest that when you first start making teas, do a lot of testing, look at it. And then you start realizing the smell of it. And we taste every single brew. So my taste buds are gonna be faster to note what I'm gonna see under the microscope because we have so much experience in doing so many teas. So I think our taste buds then are gonna tell us, oh, hey, this might need a couple more hours of bubbling, or this is ready to go. And when you taste a perfectly wonderful tea, it tastes like water. It's incredible. It's totally inert. It's perfect pH, perfect everything, because it will be like really dark green water, and you taste it. It tastes like beautiful spring water. So use your smell, use your taste buds, get to know your tea brews, and also look under a microscope so that you have that scientific backing as well. Yeah.
Can you use it, you said it's available immediately. Do you have to use all of it immediately, or can you store it?
We don't store any of it, so whenever we make our brews, we make sure that we're going to use the whole drench, because it's just really nice when it's fresh like that. Right after it's been bubbled, you look at it under a microscope or you test it, you just know that that thing is totally sparked and alive and ready to go. So that's why I was saying we don't really use sugars for any kind of preservation of it or anything. We use it right then and there because we have so much readily available biomass. We're growing tons and tons of biomass, so it just makes sense for us to be able to use it. It's like, well, when you've got fresh, green beans, why have them canned? So, yeah.
And also you can use it, you can use any extra on trees, you can just use it in your local, external things and just bring health to everything. Yeah, I mean, that's your natural chelation. It's the fermentation, just making a bioavailability to the... You could, yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, you wouldn't want to use, this at the very end of your cycle is going to, affect, some of the way that it grows. But it also, at the same time, is really inert, and it's not the same as, using a saltpeter or some kind of like a different nutrient that's a chemical nutrient or synthetic.
And it's still going to go through the microbiology process. So these teas are still going to go through the microbiology process. The plants that we grow are intelligent to uptake, several different ways because they're organically and regeneratively grown. So they're going to be able to uptake it through their exudates and having conversation with microbiology more than they're going to direct feed. Yeah, so they're going to have that intelligence to do whatever. And if you have everything in the soil, then you have a plant that can uptake what it needs at any given time. And we've really found that, we tea often, but we really don't have to water or tea that often because deep soil cultivation is what we're all about. And the deeper that our soil beds can be, the less that we're going to have to water and the less nutrients that we're going to have to put into it. So we've been realizing that when we first bought the land, we were maybe doing like 10 teas in a season, and now we're like down to 4. And we really don't do much more watering than that because they're so deep. And I'm bringing it back to that we're gardening for when we're 85. So that's a smart way to do it because you're not spending money, time, or energy. Yeah.
Are you leaving those teas down at all?
Yeah.
Probably like half.
Yeah, probably about half. So we'll make a really good tea, and then we might even just put a hose into it. When we know that it's gone half, it's constantly being drained out over the property. We live on a hillside, so all of our water and all of our tea and everything is up at the top of our property, so everything comes down. Utilizing gravity as much as you possibly can is really great. Then you're not spending time, energy, and money on pumps and all of these other systems. Yeah, if you're going to use it for foliar, you're going to want to dilute it more. No, skunk cabbage would be more, the question was, should you not taste a ferment that has skunk cabbage in it? No, I really don't put any noxious weeds that are harmful for human consumption into my tea brews. Skunk cabbage is an exception because you really have to like eat it, you know. This isn't like tasting, it's not a poisonous thing. So I really like to stay away from things that might be poisonous or give allergic reactions to human beings just because it's easier, and what we want to have on our property, we're, you know, having it there for beauty as well. We use it for biomass, but we also want it to be beautiful, and we want our property to draw the birds from overhead, that they're flying over and they're like, wow, that looks pretty sweet. Look at all that color, and that's a beautiful farm. I think I want to stop there. And they really do. They actually do stop there. So visually beautiful is also what's going to be good for your health as well. Something in the back? He's talking about fermentation.
The bubble water afterwards. So the question is, do you use the bubble hash water? Absolutely. It's amazing. So that, and also if we can't utilize it directly back into a tea, we sort of bank it into compost or into our beds over the winter and stuff. Because for us, a lot of times we make the water hash over the winter. So then we utilize that. Then so it's like we don't maybe not have anything growing at that time. We've also foliar sprayed with the hash water, and drinking the hash water is really tasty too. I guess the one thing is there is like a resinous quality to the hash water. So there you could overdo watering with the hash water, but to be able to do it here and there is going to be really, really beneficial.
And also use it fresh because it ferments.
Yeah, using it fresh is really crucial because it can turn. You had a question in the middle there. Yeah? Okay. You had a question? Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, we
How
will.
are we doing on time, Joshua? Oh, we got to start wrapping it up.
Okay, well, that's fine. We're just basically going to show where we have time right now to answer questions. We have the rest of it is just pictures of farms and what they've done with it. Yeah, well, go ahead and ask your question. Yeah. Sounds good. Yeah, well, there's a lot of examples where indoor gardens are creating a tremendous amount of pathogens too. So I wouldn't say that indoor gardening is the safe, clean gardening, and outdoor gardening is where all the bugs and all the problems are. So that's probably a matter of perception. But hoop houses do offer you the ability to do multiple depths. Maybe in 1 year here, that might be hard. Maybe you can get 2. Hoop houses are also really nice for boutique strains that are really, boutique's a word, just for a high-end strain, to be able to grow something here that might last longer. Or maybe you have a land race hoop house where you do it really early because they reach a lot, but you could be able to grow something that takes a lot longer to flower. You had a question?
Yeah, well, I had a question earlier about Kingstrom Ferry versus king oysters. Which one do you recommend?
Well, oysters and the Kingstrom Ferry are both really, really amazing. So I don't think you can say one is better than the other. I think Kingstrom Ferry probably breaks down organic matter faster, but they both are mycoremediators that remediate the water or the soil or anything that's in it. So both of them are extremely useful.
Oyster is a little bit more finicky. So Kingstrom Ferry, we've just had tremendous success, which we have later on in here as well.